welcome to this presentation or this talk. Hopefully you'll find it interesting and take away some nuggets from this. So it's so I'm just going to go through first just the sort of the essence. So this is sort of my view on a project that we worked on, and it was all about how we had to do some really impossible deadlines and so on, and basically, but also stick to kind of principles of software engineering and so on. And some of it maybe people already do, some of it is also maybe new, but hopefully, you know, putting it all together, you take away some nuggets to be able to kind of inspire, or, you know, going forward when obviously you're doing development in your respective companies and so on. So first of all, I just want to sort of set the premise for this. And basically, you know, as software engineers, we pride ourselves to build high quality software and use the best industry practices and principles. But what happens when you're asked to deliver a project with impossible timescales, where a quick hacky solution is all that is time allows? So that's what this presentation is sort of based around. And I said it was a project we did last year, for which thankfully we got it over the line and so on. But before I dive in, so that's the premise of the presentation, and so, but before I go into all of that, I'm just going to do a little bit of a sort of a bio into myself and obviously Kindred. So so I've been developing now for 26 years. Yes, you know, the gray hair that you can't see, and the wrinkles and the lines are starting to show. But I've been doing this for 26 years, started out with C, and, you know, now predominantly into Java, working in microservices for about 6 years, and always worked in kind of distributed systems, whether it was with C++ or Java. And so, but ultimately, I love playing with the toys. I love technology and new things, and always constantly trying to learn. So at Kindred, my actual job title is a line lead, but that's, you know, not really what I do or all I do. So I work more in the strategic side of software development. So I work closely with architects, stakeholders, and POs, and also as a developer, so as a mentor and thought leader to help empower and mentor sort of other sort of members in the team, and so on, across the teams and so on. I have been known by someone to be called the octopus, because I have many, always have, seem to have many hats and so on. So just going through into Kindred. So oh yeah. So ultimately, you know, I'm a geek who likes playing with the toys. Is essentially the thing. So what is who is Kindred? So Kindred is basically a tech company that operates in the online gambling space. So we do a lot with sports betting and casino. And just going to give you some sort of stats about sort of Kindred and what we do, just to give you an idea of kind of how we are at this tech company and kind of some of the challenges that we have. So we broke up the monolith. It was way before I started at Kindred, but we broke up the monolith in 2010. And at the moment we have 310. I think back when I first started 4 years ago, we had about 100, just over 100 microservices. We're now up to 310. And actually, since writing this presentation, which was about a few weeks ago, then we've actually added 9 new microservices in that time, because it's gone up to 319. And, you know, we strive for continuous delivery, so where regulation allows us to. So we can't always, because we're heavily regulated by the industry. So we do about 11,000 releases a year across all the teams. And as I said, we work in a very strict compliance and regulatory industry. So it throws up a lot of challenges, tech challenges that we have to overcome. And, you know, recently we've had this big initiative to move on to Kubernetes. As we say, because one of the things that Kindred is very big on is we see tech strategy as a key enabler to increasing revenue. So we see our next generation of platform going to excel massively by moving onto the Kubernetes platform. Some more sort of facts as well. So, you know, we have this kind of team ownership. So we're very own of the agile process. So you can pick your poison, whether it's we typically Scrum or Kanban. We have to align at the macro level. So obviously there's some alignment there, where there's some rules for consistency, but generally the teams are empowered to do whatever they want within reason. And also, you know, monitoring observability. You know, I always use the phrase that, you know, we have to look after our own baby. So, you know, team responsibility for incident management and out of hour support and so on, and how you govern yourselves with all the different monitoring. It's all kind of pushed down. So there's guidelines and there's things we have to sort of meet in terms of requirements, but ultimately it's the team responsibility to how they align to those core principles. Some ideas just to give you an idea of the kind of load that we kind of do. We've got 1.8 million active customers, and that's sort of growing. And obviously during the World Cup, we had a 1 million in a month of active customers. Sort of like kind of give us a transaction. So we have 45 million on average wallet transactions per day. So we can go up to highs of 60 million, which is one of our all-time highs, so 60 and so on. But ultimately, we're averaging around 45 million transactions per day. So you can see there's quite a lot that goes through our system. And also our send out capability, we have the capability to target upwards of 3 million customers within a day. That's not atypical. A lot of times it's quite low, but if there's a big Champions League final, obviously we've got some Euro newsletters going out at the moment, and they can easily go into that sort of 3 million customers that we'll target within a day. So that's kind of giving some background to Kindred, myself, and so on. And so, just to give you a bit of context. So now we want to get into the actual presentation itself and kind of set the scene. So does this sound familiar? As software engineers, can you kind of empathize or relate to some of these statements of, I know this is a crazy deadline, but what can I do? I'm told failure is not an option. You get people saying, well, we've already paid for the marketing. And also, this deadline, anything, we have to hit this deadline. Anything else is nice to have. These are some of the kind of sound bites that through my years I've heard multiple times and multiple times. And then usually what happens with us is that we get into this time to cry now, where some of the things that we start thinking about is we haven't even been able to remove the debt since the last hack job. So we're just building more debt on top of more debt. And, the amount of debt is going to hurt us in the future, and also as software engineers, we like to pride ourselves with doing a good job. And it's like, how can we develop software properly if, say, for example, and reliably and work with consistent integrity and with integrity, how can we do this if we're constantly hacking? It's always going to be a very sort of not sound foundations to work. So at times it's almost like we're diametrically opposed between kind of the commercial element and the technical element. So ultimately, this is about how do we get to the point where we kind of bridge that gap, where we achieved we have to achieve the commercial goals, because they're important as well, because we all want to succeed together, and revenue is one of the key KPIs in terms of success. But obviously as well, we want to make sure that everything that we build is sound and so on. And obviously software principles, following software principles is a key enabler for ensuring that you've got sound foundations in your software and you can build on for the future. So that's basically the kind of the premise. So now it's time to kind of get down to the technical side of it. But before I get into the technical side, I just want to kind of surface here, because I talk a lot about saying principles. So I just wanted to highlight what were the principles that kind of governed us a little bit. And that's not to say these are the only principles. They're just the principles that essentially were kind of governed us whilst we were doing this through this project. So the first one is sort of like a lot from domain-driven design. I sort of really love this book. I've read it 3 times, and I'm almost considering reading it a 3rd time, because it always sort of throws up some new things that I didn't really pick up on the previous readings. So things like ubiquitous language, bounded context, maintaining the model integrity, isolating the domain layer, and continuous integration. So these are some of the key areas. I mean, bounded context was very key, and obviously ubiquitous language as well was quite key, trying to get that common language between the commercial stakeholders and also the commercial stakeholders and the developers, making sure that we're all talking from the same hymn sheet and so on. So that was one of some of the key principles. And another one was clean architecture. So we looked at, so this was another big one as well, which I think is a great book to read. And there's something like solid principles, and obviously the component principles is the extension of solid. So taking solid more to our component level rather than more you kind of interfaces in class design and so on. Setting the clear boundaries, separating the layers of ports and adapters. So we use that a lot, that paradigm of ports and adapter, and obviously just writing nice clean code. So those are kind of the principles that sort of govern. Like I said, this is not an exhaustive list of all of the principles. I just wanted to kind of give some kind of idea and context as to when I'm talking about principles, what principles were we kind of fostering during this project where we did this? So now let's sort of dive into this. So some of these slides, when we dive in, I really here just to give you context of what the challenge was. It's not really for you to necessarily understand every detail of the design, because ultimately it's very specific to our business domain and so on, and some of the terminology will make sense and may not make sense. So I just really want to show this because it just adds a bit of context. So I may gloss over a little bit. Hopefully I don't lose you along the way, because I'd like to leave some time to really go through the techniques that we used to kind of get us to where we wanted to be, and also and potentially use that to feed into more discussion. So the current system, as it was last year, was sort of like this. So we have this audience platform, send out platform. It's all about marketing comms, so how we communicate with customers, engage with them, and offer them rewards and so on. So we had this sort of big blob as a campaign system. So this is the area that we're going to focus on as part of this presentation, and what the project focused on, and it was called the campaign system, and it was a big blob. I mean, just to give you a little bit of things why it wasn't going to work. I mean, it became a micro monolith. So although we broke up the monolith in 2010, we basically started to create new micro monoliths where multiple responsibilities into one. I stopped counting the number of responsibilities that was inside the campaign system. It was just one big thing. The project that we needed to do last year was very much a real-time engagement with customers, and as one of our new pay and play models that we got in Finland. And ultimately it was all about real-time in behavior, real-time behavior and real-time engagement, comms engagement. So, and this system didn't support that in no way, shape or form. It was very much this kind of heavy lifting batch and so on. So we had numerous performance issues because it just creaked over time and so on. So, the development had a huge amount of technical debt and so on. So these were the kind of the problems that we had with this particular system. Said it's not going to work. So then we sort of came up with what was going to work. So we came up with this as a target architect. Just to give a bit of context as well, there's probably another 5 new services that have gone live since this happened, but I'm really talking about this particular project and where we ended up at the end of May, middle of May last year, and so on. So yeah, so with this, we've got these components here, and I'm just going to quickly go through. And again, this is really just to give people some sort of context. So when you start to hear some of the other stuff later on, you've got a little bit of context, but don't worry too much about actually what all these responsibilities are. So there's a color coding here, which is quite important. So the blue boxes here are the ones that are really the point of the presentation. So there was sort of 8 components that we had to release all in one go, and ultimately these 4 are the point of a decision that we took to hit the deadline and so on. So that's the reason why they're blue and the other ones are gray. So we got basically the campaign sender executor. This is basically which it executes the strategy of the campaign, so how we're going to communicate with them, and it delegates work off to various different workhorses to say, do this, do this. So it's kind of like the one that's handing out the actions to do based on the strategy of the campaign. The campaign customer details is just there to store all of the relevant information while we're targeting that customer, from contact information to other like personalization for comms and so on. And I call it the locker. It's just a locker storage where we can store stuff there for later on when we want to engage with the customer. We've got it all in one place, because this is very much of an event-driven system. And with this event-driven system, we don't know which node it's going to come back to, or which pod in Kubernetes. So it's all about how can we have a place to store in a locker that when we come back afterwards in this asynchronous flow, that we've got everything that we need. Then we've got the marketing compliance. This is all around making sure that the component is so that when we try and target the customer, that we can. So maybe the customers as excluded themselves, say they've got a problem, or maybe they've said through GDPR that we are not allowed to profile them, or not allowed to market to them. So this handles all of that logic. So it kind of deals with that and says whether or not we can actually target them. So just because we've got the customer selection doesn't mean we have to process it. And then we've got this snapshot, which is literally just a component that stores a snapshot of the strategy of the campaign taken from the setup. So then we dive into the orchestrator. It's very simple. It just orchestrates the proceedings. So it's one that kind of says, right now it's time to start the campaign send out and so on. It uses the scheduler. The scheduler is just an alarm system like Alexa, where you just say, set alarm for me, notify me when that alarm goes off, so it can say campaign is going to be sent out. And then we've got the model, campaign model, which is basically where the users, the marketing users, engage with the back office to say, here is the strategy that I want you to execute, and it's stored there, and so on. And then we've got the association service, which is the component which basically states that it's when we target customers, that's where we store, that's where we keep the record of, yes, we've targeted. So when we say we've targeted over 3 million customers, that's where we keep that accounting in there. Hopefully all that made sense, and I didn't, like I said, I don't think we need to get too much into detail of it. I just wanted to give some sort of context, because when you see a lot of boxes, it might just kind of look a bit, oh, so it's just to give a bit of context as to what everything is in a sort of broad strokes, high level. So what that meant for our target state was, so this is where the blue comes in. So basically what we decided to do was, we decided to basically put 4 components into one. So instead of releasing 8 new components, we released 4, right? And so basically it turned out like this. So we basically put campaign, so the executor was the main component, and we put the market compliance, customer details, and the snapshot into that same component. So now we've got to go into shock horror. So I'm talking about principles and talking about how, we're trying to get rid of debt, and straight away we built debt with this new design, because we built this new system, we've run this new system, but ultimately, we're putting four responsibilities into one component, breaking the kind of the ethos behind microservices. So essentially what it was, we had to hit a deadline, and with that deadline, we had to try and work out what can we safely, what decisions can we make now to give us a bit more time, and to give you an idea, sometimes saving 1 day, saving 2 days a week, that was an immense amount of time, and we had to replace pretty much our whole sender execution within 4.5 months. Because when they realized it wasn't going to work for the deadline, that we basically had to replace it in tandem, working in tandem with the existing system as well. So saving just 1 day, saving a few days here and there, and we looked at all of the areas where we could do that. And one of so that was where we sort of looked at it. So when we looked at the reasons for it, we looked at a few areas of like why was going to be fastest to make this quite a radical decision of putting 4 components into one. So a couple of the nuggets of things which was on the slide here is obviously, if you're in components and external, you've got all of that sort of like back off retries and so on that you'd have to deal with, if you had it separate components. By having it in one component meant you're just making Java calls. So therefore we said, right, we don't have time to make sure that we have all the retry for failure at this moment. So if we put these together, because they were very tightly coupled together, whereas like in the association service side, we felt that had to be a separate component because of the nature of what it was doing and the importance of some of the functionality. So we took a strategic decision that those 4 components were safe to kind of put together for now, with a strategy and a plan to split them out afterwards. And that's the main basis of the presentation, where I'll explain the techniques that we used to basically allow us to split them out once we had more time to do so. Also, in this process as well, it wasn't just about, dealing with the failure, the retries and so on. It was also areas of like, releasing them. We have to go through a release process because they're new components. We have to do security checks on them and so on and so forth. That didn't save us a massive amount of time, because we have quite a good and fit for purpose in terms of sometimes it takes a bit longer for the right reasons. release process, but still, by putting it into one and just reducing some of that burden. And when we could fit that time in later on, that saved us a bit of time as well, and so on. So that was, and also one of the things to kind of surface as well, because we were going so fast, we had the time, we had to do it just enough to make sure that we delivered. And in some cases, we wasn't sure what the name of the component was. So actually, by not creating the component at this point, we had time to think about it and say, right, now we know exactly what we should call this component. And therefore, we didn't have to go through all of that kind of unpicking of stuff later on. So we could do it in that way. So that's the reasons why we sort of looked at it in the sense of, right, it's faster for us to hit the deadline by making those decisions. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of an overview on the sort of challenge and kind of why we decided to make quite a drastic decision in one sense. But yeah, so now we're going to get into sort of like, how did we fix it? So how did we do this in a way that we kept to the principles, and ultimately, how can we get ourselves out of this problem as quickly as possible after we've hit the commercial deadline? So now I'm going to go through several techniques that we basically used, and essentially I'll go through those a bit, and might spend a bit more time here because this is more about the technical side of it and about the principles that we used. So first of all, technique one was define the capabilities. So using the sort of domain-driven design, we wanted to really surface in each component what is the capabilities of each component, and making sure as well that the responsibility of that component was well known. So even though there's 4 in 1, we wanted to make it clear what the capabilities and what were the responsibility, and make sure that we didn't blur the lines. So in the case of, just take an example of the sender executor, the capabilities are process customer selections, producing associations, receiving associated customers, sending communications, and the local segment management. So these were the capabilities that we highlighted, and then this sort of dovetailed into the next piece technique, which is the clear packaging. So as you can see here, that what we've got is these are actually nice and clearly surfaced in the actual package layer. So you can actually say, exactly where you're going to. And I didn't have the sort of screen height to show you all of it, but even the responsibilities were clearly packaged as well. So you could actually see that there were 4 different responsibilities packaged into this one component. So it was all kind of clear. And the idea was to make it all sort of self-evident. And also we want, using the kind of the ports and adapters. So if you look inside of this particular package structure, you can see clearly where's the messaging adapter, where is the repository adapter, and where is your controller, if there was any controllers in there, adapters as well. So making sure that is very clear. And this actually saved us a lot, because one of the challenges that we had to deal with, not only doing in 4.5 months, actually replace the whole send execution. I lost 2 of my most senior developers very quickly on, and another one left about a month into the project. One went on maternity leave, the other one resigned, and also another one resigned about a month into that. So we literally had to get new people in. The 2 people, thankfully, were actually still working in Kindred, so they kind of knew our processes and how we worked, but ultimately they had to come into a new domain, and a domain they hadn't worked in before. And obviously this clear packaging really helped us massively for them to be able to get up to speed and get moving very quickly. So yeah, and they were basically working on sort of critical path work very quickly to enable us to hit that deadline. So that clear packaging, it really saved us a lot, because they found it a lot easier to come in and also and get up to speed. So then we went into sort of technique 3, which is the ports and adapters, as I mentioned. So we use this. So this is a model which I won't go into all the details of it, but it just kind of surfaced the main key points that I see. So the clearly separated adapter layer. So if you saw in that packaging layer where the rest and the messaging and so on is clearly removed from from the business logic layer. So the domain layer. So if you want to understand how the domain is working, it's very clear to go in there and know. And with that that separation, it really made it easier when some people asked us later on to say, hey, we don't want to use the event means to associate a customer. We want a REST equivalent, and we can easily create a new adapter layer for that and just add it in without massive unpicking. So that saved us a lot when we had some of those curveballs that came our way. Obviously as well, making sure that in the adapter layer that repositories always return root aggregates. I'll explain a little bit later on that it wasn't all perfect. Not everything went according to plan with this, but generally speaking, making sure that we surface proper root aggregates and not partial objects, and so on, which is a key part of kind of domain-driven design, and also the ports and adapter model. And then obviously, extracting utility classes so they're clearly out into a different package layer, so that you can see. So again, it's very good to see where is your kind of configuration setup or your kind of database setup and whatever. That's totally away from that. Again, really helps to kind of with that understanding of what is the core business logic and so on. So yeah, so those are the kind of things where we got benefit from the ports and adapter, and it really worked right. It did take a bit of a while for some people because they hadn't come across it before, and it was a bit new to them, and so on. And some of the decisions that were made sounded a little bit crazy at certain times, because it was like, but the objects are the same. But then later on, as you saw that actually the adapter layer had a different kind of model structure to the actual business domain layer, because as more development went through, basically they diverged. Then ultimately, people start to realize, yeah, this makes sense now. Why keeping the layers and like that model integrity, keeping them separated and clearly is a really good thing to do, and so on. The other technique we did as well was kind of setting up the topics. So and this was a big decision, as although it was all within one component, as you can see in this diagram here, they were basically registering for topics and events. So the same component was producing and consuming the same event. And the idea behind this strategy here was that we want it to be agnostic. We didn't want these components to know that it's the same component that's actually producing and consuming, because when we move it out and it's in its own separate component, that we don't have to change any of the messaging strategy. So therefore, that's all the same. The topics, the queues is the same, and we can have two running in parallel. So that therefore we can kind of make sure that it meets the same requirements of the existing one before we actually switch it over, and so on. So that gave us that beauty. If we'd actually sort of said, oh yeah, well, because they're all in one component, we could just use a Java call, then it meant that we'd have to pick those out later on and put it in that messaging layer. So putting that messaging layer in, we saw as a key driver. There were some Java calls, which was as you can see here, from where the campaign sender executor is getting the snapshot from the campaign sender snapshot. That one we did as a Java call because we know later on that we had a way of packaging and encapsulating that call such that when we did move it to be a REST call later on, that actually it would be a minimal impact to us. But yeah, so that's where we took some key decisions about what we felt would be harder to unpick later on, and so on. So some we took some of the initial shortcuts, and some we said no, we need to make sure that we have to create these topics up front and have that whole messaging adapter layer in place from day one, and so on. So yeah, so that was to technique 4 that I wanted to kind of highlight there. Hopefully that all made sense, but yeah. And then we got technique 5, which is it might sound simple and obvious, but it's very easy for people to try and link tables together. So we knew that we were going to have in the same schema multiple so 4 components with their respective tables, and it's very easy. Oh, I can link these together and get some performance improvement. But obviously, once you're trying to unpick those components afterwards, you've got to unpick the fact that they're linked. So that was very key to just make sure in the back of our minds that we kept everything because you can see that we layered it, kept the bounding context from the perspective of how we did the packaging, and make sure that the only way to communicate between bounding context was through service messages. But ultimately, it's on the database scheme, so you can break all that good work by just putting a link in the table. So that's where we just needed to make sure that that didn't happen, and so on, so that we made it easier to unpick it later on. So technique 6 it's one of the ones I quite like, actually, because this one here I might take a little bit more time just to kind of explain it, just to kind of what it was. So as I said before, we got the capabilities, and this is where highlighting the capability was very, very important, because as I mentioned when we talked about the capabilities, I said we've got the sender execution, we've got the local snapshot management, and then we've got the snapshot management. Now, in reality, what happened was that the snapshot management realistically should be in a separate component. Right, so you've got the send out execution, which has a local, the names could be a bit better, but I wanted to kind of articulate exactly what we've done. So these are the names that you can see in the code today, and so on. So, but there is some probably room for improvement on the naming. But just to explain the technique, so we have the local storage service, which basically what it's doing is it needs, so when the sender execution says, oh, I need to decide, do I need to send comms to this customer? So I need the snapshot to tell me, do I need to send comms to this customer? Oh, I don't have the snapshot. Right. So what happens there is that the local storage snapshot says, right, I don't have this particular snapshot because it's in my local cache. So obviously I haven't seen this customers for this particular send out before. So I need to refresh my cache. So there you go to this fallback refresh local storage. So that makes a service call to the local storage management service. So this is the one that's basically managing the cache. So it's saying these are, so before that, the send execution would say, can you give me the snapshot? And it did, so I don't have it. So then it says, right, okay. So then it goes to the fallback and says, all right, so I need to go and grab that. Now, we know that from the architecture that the snapshot service is the one that has the fallback. That's the one that stores in a database all of the available snapshots. And then what happens is, so then this is the call. So then the local storage management service calls find execution, which basically is that snapshot, and then returns it back. And then the local storage management service stores it into local cache. And then after that, all subsequent calls in that particular instance or pod will basically say, right, I've got the snapshot in my local cache, so I don't need to go to the fallback. So that's how that sort of works. And in that diagram there, it's all doing Java service calls. But obviously, when we actually split out the service, so the first two capabilities, the sender execution and the local snapshot management, they're basically in the campaign sender executor, because that's where those capabilities should be. But the snapshot management is going to go in the snapshot service. So what we was able to do there was, because we kept clear boundaries, bounded context, and we kept clear boundaries, and we talked service to service, what that actually meant was, when we actually changed the find execution from, instead of being a Java service call, it's now a REST call, we didn't have to change anything on the sender execution side. Now, this is just one example that we did, but we did this quite repeatedly, where we knew that eventually that was going to be pulled out into a new service. And because we had the right bounded context set up based off the capabilities, and we made sure that they were always called by services, only the area that was going to be affected by the change of splitting out into two different components was the one that was needed to change. So that, and therefore we protected. So if you think about like solid principles with like open close, and I always forget the equivalent one, which is from the clean architecture, which talks about it. But there's an equivalent of the open close in the clean architecture, which is exactly what that is doing. So don't expose the fact there's a change happening here to externally to places that don't really need to be affected. And that saved us a lot, because it meant that the amount of effort we had to do to be able to lift and shift out the snapshot management into the snapshot campaign snapshot service was a bit more minimal. So that was that. Hopefully that all made sense. And and so on. But we can potentially just, open up to questions on that later on if people want to have, talk a bit more about it. So then we get into, right, so those are the kind of the techniques that I want. There was some other bits as well, but I didn't want to keep you here for 2 hours. People always say that I can talk the hind legs off a donkey, but I didn't want to sort of keep everyone here for too long today. So I just wanted to service some of the key sort of ones that I felt was important in terms of what we did and so on. So the all important bit now is okay, we've took these decisions. What does that mean in terms of the end of this? So ultimately, we have to lift and shift them out. We have to get them to target state, because that's where we want to be, because that's the only way we've really succeeded on bridging the gap, is if we fix that technical debt that we built up by putting 4 into 1. So just to give you some of the data of what happened, thankfully, we're actually in target state at the moment, which is great. So we got all the 4 components out. We haven't switched off the logic yet in the executor, because ultimately we're taking it slowly and so on. But all of the 4 components are there and now doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. So the marketing compliance was the biggest success story, because that just took us 2 hours to lift the code out of the executor into its new shell. So we got the new shell, dropped it in, and it was running within 2 hours. Obviously, it took a bit longer because we had to put feature switches in. So the feature switching technology, because we needed to make sure that only one of them was actually processing the event. So both were consuming from the topic, but ultimately one was the one responsible for taking on, and we needed to be able to revert back. So the feature switching strategy took us a little bit of time to work through about how we're going to make sure that we don't get any any problems, because if we could get duplicates, and then obviously either target customers with rewards twice, or maybe send comms, duplicate comms, and so on. So we had to make sure that that was properly done. So that took a bit longer, but in terms of actually the code, we lifted and shifted it in 2 hours. Which the campaign snapshot took a little bit longer, and that was mainly because it had the Java service call. So the technique 6 that I explained about, where we had to put a REST call in there, had to do that. And same goes for the campaign customer detail service as well. This one is, I think it's sort of ready to go, but it's not actually. I think it's just going through the release process at the moment. So our release process, because it's a new component. So although the code is effectively the same, we need to go through the same sort of all the release checks that we have to go through with the various teams to check. But that one took a little bit more, because we had to do that. But again, in terms of the actual development side, we got that lifted and shifted relatively smoothly. There was a. I mean, I will talk about some of the uglies, because not all of it went plain sailing, but I'll talk about that in a couple of slides time. As I said, I use feature switches a lot, and there was a little bit of unwanted coupling, which kind of delayed things as well. So it wasn't all plain sailing, but generally speaking, it worked really well in terms of what we needed to do. So now we're kind of getting to the end of this sort of presentation now, and I just wanted to kind of highlight the keys to success, because when I talked about it earlier on in the presentation, it talked a lot about making sure that we how do we bridge that gap between commercial goals and keeping to software principles. Right. So first of all, we managed to hit the commercial goal. I mean, it was just about. I mean, at one point, I think I used the analogy that I felt like I needed a lot of people to kind of just wake me up and shake me, and just to keep me alive, because it was a few sort of like late nights and stuff and things to make sure that we did hit the deadline. But we got there. The core architecture was sound, and we had solid foundation for the future, and we've been building on top of this. So that's for me the great sign of SM is that when you want to build on top of and you want to change, you've got flexibility at your core to be able to adapt to that change. And we've had a few little snags in there, but generally speaking, we are saying yes, bring on your requirements. We can start facilitating them. Whereas before it was almost no room at the inn. get in line. It's going to take us a long time to get that done. So that gave us, so we got the solid foundations that we wanted from the architecture, the new architecture. The clear package names was most evident, and it was, I think, one of the testaments is one of our kind of enterprise architects was looking to do a gap to interact with what we'd built. And ultimately, he sort of like was looking at the code, and he said he could clearly understand, how it was working, what was happening. He didn't have to. He obviously got an overview of from the architecture perspective, but he was actually able to see how that related into the code as well. So that was really good. And I think the clear package names really helped him to navigate to where he wanted to look and so on. And then obviously as well, I think, there was a lot of discussions here as well to get this right, but, there was, generally speaking, we didn't really violate context boundaries. We were using the service layer a lot, which gave us a lot of affordability when we wanted to kind of move things around and split them out and so on. So that was really key for us. And I think it was adopted very well by the team and so on. And yeah, and the thing, and by deferring decisions as well to later on, so we didn't have to tackle them at that moment in time. Because obviously, if you've got to do the critical decisions have to be taken now, but if you can defer as many as possible to give you time, it's almost like you get the benefit of hindsight without actually really having that. Because we could defer some stuff to say, hey, we're still safe, we've still got sound foundations to move forward, and we can still make all the guarantees and promises that we say we want to give. But at the same time, we can park that for now, giving us time to think about, okay, actually, yes, good job we didn't do it the way we thought we were going to do it, because in reality, it wasn't quite, now we've got more information about how it should work than from a requirement or whatever. And by deferring that kind of gave us a better view and just more time to think about some of those challenges as well. So because I think when you try and make all your decisions all up front and ones that, then it usually blows the mind. And when it blows the mind, we get defensive. And when we get defensive, we're building flexible core architecture. And when you've got inflexible core, yes, you've got new components, so they're all shiny and new, but it's going to be a year, 2 years, you're going to be back to square one again. So being able to work out what we could defer to later really worked beautifully for us and so on. So the last bit now, and then you're free of my dulcet tones, but yeah, is some of the pain points of this. So as I said, there was some coupling that didn't quite go according to plan, and most in the logging. So the logging was a bit where we had a bit of coupling with that, and we had to unpick it. Didn't take too long to unpick it, but there's and yeah, so not all the boundary context. So we've had a few, I think I mentioned roughly in the campaign customer detail service, where it wasn't quite as smooth sailing as we wanted to, but the fact we actually had the majority in the right place, then it meant that, there was some discussions, but discussions when we had more time, so we could think about it more, and then we can address them quickly and so on. And yes, and then also, the discussions around the feature switching as well was some things which were quite challenging and stuff, because we had to get those right. And for some people as well, it was the first time they've been using feature switches, so to get their mind around how you do them in the right way to make sure that it's safe and right was some discussions, but I think that everyone learned from that, and now adding feature switches is a much more painless sort of exercise for us. So that is from me. Hopefully that you enjoyed this presentation, and yes, so time for questions or discussion.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. Thank you very much indeed. We actually do have a few questions. Some people have already actually started sending us some questions. So the first question we have is that you had to really think outside the box here, but what's annoying is that we always have to do so in order to deliver on unrealistic deadlines. Would you say it's the development team's job to always innovate in order to hit deadlines?
So I think, one of the things that always kind of guided me, I saw a presentation many years ago, and he talked about, it was one from some guy at the BBC, and they're talking about the iPlayer. And they were talking about a commercial deadline of the Olympics, and they were the host broadcaster. And he said they had a big decision to make there, because irrespective of whether you can persuade the commercial element to change their expectations in terms of deadlines. I don't, it's good luck trying to get the Olympic committee to change the Olympics. So if you're late, then you've missed the Olympics. You've got a 2-week window to be for everything to be working in the right way. So a lot of times I think commercial deadlines are there. Sometimes they're kind of soft deadlines where maybe they can shift. But in the case of some of the ones where we've had, where you're going to do a big product launch, so you're going to spend on advertising, maybe commercials, whatever. If those adverts go out and you've paid for them, then first of all, if you don't put them out, then it's lost revenue. But also, if you do put them out, then you're advertising something that's not quite there or quite right. So to a large extent, I think the commercial deadlines have to drive everything, because that's where the revenue is going to come from. But where I think you can get with the happy medium is say, do you need everything for that launch? So, do I need every piece of requirement? Is some of those requirements, I know we have that word nice to have. I don't think we use it well enough, but a lot of times, and that's what I said about some of our decisions where we actually deferred them to later on. We was able to work with the commercial and say, look, you're not going to get everything you want for that launch, but what's the minimum you need for that launch? And make sure we get that right in the same way. So I think it's where you got, the thing is, it's a negotiation position for me is okay. I always like to say you start off with your target where you want to be, and then you say, right, based on the timelines of when you want to launch, you scale back and so on, and scale back from there and say, right, what can we achieve within that? And then that's when the conversation between the two elements of commercial and tech sort of like, I always use it because I always like to make some jokes in this. We all get in the boxing ring with our boxing gloves and start duking it out. But obviously it's more civilized than that because we are professionals.
Another question I have is, one of the big issues I faced was that sales team promised the world and we suffer. They get paid bonuses and commission regardless of whether the product is 100% or not. I know you're based in-house, but what would you think could help here?
Yeah, I mean,
that's from I'm guessing the kind of the angle here is that they produce products, so I'm guessing there's some sort of a agency, so they produce products for clients here, I'm guessing, which is different, but still.
Yeah, so I think there's not much you can do about that, but what in terms of stopping it, I worked in a company many years ago, which did exactly that, where the sales, sometimes they were saying, if we get this, it was told to us that we've got this sale on the basis we do some development, but actually it turned out what it was that no, if you did this development, the customer might buy it, and we were running away developing it. And I think one of the things that so I think something you can't stop that, because I mean, thankfully in Kindred, we don't have that problem too much. I'm not saying we don't have the problem, because I think people always want the world, but we don't have it that much. But one of the areas that I found worked quite well in that way was because I think as tech people, we can always challenge that and challenge the okay, why do you need that? What benefit are you going to have? So you can kind of work with them and say, to challenge that. I mean, some of that is probably more, if you've got product owners, is probably where they should fit in. But I mean, if they're not doing that, then obviously stepping in from your perspective and say, challenge why do you need that, and also challenging and that way, then, because I think when you ask those questions, then you start to realize, okay, yes, and then you can say, right, so if you don't need it 100%, then why can't we push it to later on? Why do you need that right now? And so on. And then it's sort of like working on that negotiation with them, saying, okay, well, if you do need it, can we not put this timeline together and say, right, instead of you getting it all in 3 months, you get it over a 6-month period, giving us space to be able to do that. So I think that's the best advice I can give there, is kind of asking more of the why, because I think sometimes we get into this habit of saying the customer's always right, but sometimes the customer needs a bit of help and guidance to say, well, actually, are you always, is everything you want? And then I think also there's a trust factor in there as well, because sometimes people always ask for the world because they feel if they don't ask for it for when they get it, they might not get the priority afterwards. So I think that being on that trust, where working with the kind of commercial element, and dealing with that is the best advice I can give. It's kind of worked for me a little bit. I must admit, I've had some fruitful conversations when these have happened to kind of to highlight it. But yeah, because you can't get blood out of a stone. So there's no, if you say you've promised the world, and you say, well, you can't get blood out of stone. So you either work with us to find out what we can do to achieve what you've sold, or you're going to have a lot of unhappy customers.
Thank you very much for that. Now we've got two very similar questions, actually. One that says, do you at Kindred include the tech team in the setting of deadlines? And the other one that says, this is a really good example, but also a very specific case. In general, there's always a gap between development and says deployment. No, I think they meant development and management team. How is it in your workplace?
So yeah, we're quite fortunate in one sense in that because capacity is dealt with by the tech. So we understand what resources we have, and we put out whatever what velocity of what we can commit to within. We tend to do like quarterly, so we look at things on a quarterly basis and so on. I mean, we do we have like almost quarterly roadmaps in a sense, so they can change, but you have quarterly. And so with that capacity of what you're able to do, that's driven by the tech. So priority order is more from the product owner kind of sort of vertical, and they can set what's most important. But in terms of what is achievable is driven by that assessment of capacity, because it's the tech people who know what resources we have. It's the tech people that know, mainly the line manager who get involved in that, and they know if people are leaving, if people new starters, if we need to lobby for more resources, etc., etc. So with that, when it comes to commitment on deadlines, it's a conversation between the kind of product owner structure and the tech organization to say, can we actually commit to that date?
He says, this is a very, very interesting question here. I like it. It's primarily to you, Craig, as well. I've seen it often when developers are promoted into management. They also get disconnected from us and forget how things are and the frustrations we go through. As a tech leader, any idea why this happens?
Yeah, it's a good one.
That's a good one.
It is a good one. And I mean, for me, I always feel like because my style of leadership is always very much based around thought leadership rather than telling people what to do. So I find when you do thought leadership, it's more around you feel their pain. So sometimes you help out so I still get involved in out of hours production incidents, so I still dabble in there. I still help out with the kind of just dealing with some day-to-day. Sometimes I don't code as much, but so the high level architecture I drove a lot of that, but I also did stuff where I can to kind of feel part of the team, because as you're saying, feel that connected feel. So that's just my style, but I know it's not a common path that people tend to take. I think the main thing is it's very hard to understand something that you don't feel yourself. So I find that if you feel a certain level of pain from something, then you empathize more, and that's one of the reasons why for me I sort of feel like still to get involved in some of those kind of what you would see more of a developer expectation, just to kind of feel how it is on the ground and stuff, because you can get disconnected. And I think that's for me what I believe people should do is it's just my personal opinion. I think people should still kind of get it still a bit connected to people and then so that you can empathize, because also as well, I think that's what most people want, isn't it? Is to feel that you feel their pain, and then you're working together to improve on that. I think obviously as you go further up, it's, if you go into like higher level development managers and engineering managers and CTOs and stuff, it's a lot harder because I wouldn't expect, I'd be very surprised if my CTO sat down next to us and started coding. Not saying he doesn't or wouldn't, but I'll be surprised in that. But I think then it's the idea for me where that comes from. And I think there's no easy answer to this because I think it's a mixed bag. So
Craig?
Downwards and that's how it goes. But if you actually have a feedback loop coming back from the bottom, people at the ground, and that's pushed up and fed back up, then you can start to get that feel. So one of the things I talk to my team about, because we've had quite a lot of challenges and a lot of people have said, although they're enjoying a lot of stuff that they're doing, it is quite a lot of work to do. I said, but if you communicate it effectively, then people will really understand. If you're always saying that, if you're always saying that this is all a mess, no one can really understand a mess. They just understand the feeling. Okay, I can empathize with it's a mess and how I'd feel if it's a mess, but I can't really help you. So it's about how how you kind of communicate upwards, so people can start to empathize with empathize with this empathize with the situation you're in. Yeah.
Well, I think we're coming towards the end of the thing, but there is one last question. It's been sent to us. Just for the sake of the person who's asked it, basically, what are your thoughts on automation as a tool to help meet deadlines? Also, how much automation do you have in place?
Yeah, so automation was something where we had a lot of unit test coverage was great. We had some kind of well, I call them.
I'm guessing they mean here automation probably on the testing side of things. I think that's usually what takes the most time.
Yeah, but so what we're doing now, we're changing our whole strategy on that to make it a bit more transparent. Again, for a lot of the stuff I said about with clear packaging, clear ubiquitous language, a large part of all of that is being clear and obvious about what it is you're doing and what you've done. And I found so that our integration tests were never very clear on what actually we've tested. So you look at them and say, oh, it's all passed. But you'd have to go through and spend like an hour or two to really understand what is it covered, what all features has it covered. So we're looking at changing that more to be more clearer, because what I'm challenging people to do is say, I want your test to be able to give in a right language, so I can give to my product owner or even potentially give to a commercial stakeholder and say, this is what we've covered. That way, then you get a better idea of actually, because after a while they get a bit unwieldy. So that's one of the challenges we've got on us at the moment. But we do have sort of automation, but not to where we want it to be. And I think the only way to get to a really good place of fast development is through automation, because you want that feedback loop very quickly. And I think if you've got the automation in place, then you're getting a very, very quick feedback loop. So, one of the challenges that we're working on at the moment is how to get code reviews down to, so we do OKRs in Kindred, and I've got one, and sometimes I think it may be a bridge too far, but I want all code reviews to be done within 60 minutes, no more than 60 minutes on any code review, right? But the reason why you find sometimes code reviews takes longer is that what people do is, one, they don't even understand. They're not understanding the code properly because it's a lot of code, or one, they don't understand what the capabilities or the requirements should be. So when they look at it, they're just looking at basically what I say now, IntelliJ can do. A lot of code reviews, people just do what IntelliJ can do. They just look at what the code in front of them. They're actually looking at how it's working with what, it's not how it's with what it's meant to do, and critique and saying, hang on a minute, this isn't going to work. You're causing problems because people don't understand. So when you get to the point where your code is documented itself, when you do the code review, you should be focusing more on its behaviors, not on the sort of Java constructs, because that part should be very quick. And using things like IntelliJ is very good, Saunders is very good. You've got some other tools as well that can do that code analysis. That can all be done within 5 minutes, because if you get the reports coming out, you've got your unit tests, you've got your integration tests, you've got your component tests. quick read through those. Everything looks good. Now I'm going to dive into the actual details of what you've done. And because I understand everything, because I've got all of these reports from the test reports and so on, then you get a really fast feedback loop then.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Craig. Well, I think we're slightly overshot on the time, but yeah, the questions were really interesting. Thank you, guys. Does anybody have any more questions? Anything else you'd like to ask Craig? I mean, look, by all means, you can always reach out to him on LinkedIn. He told us he's more than happy to chat and engage with anybody really. So if you feel more comfortable that way, by all means. If not, we're ready to take any questions. Otherwise, Craig, seems like we've questioned out. That's it. We run out of questions now. Thank you very much. I think we've with the time wise also we've overshot a bit. So thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure having you here with us today. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.
It's been very informative. I think also the questions were really, really good. You answered the questions really well as well. Thank you very much for that. Guys, thank you so much for attending. It's been a pleasure having you all. And yeah, Craig, have a great day. And so the same to everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Take care.